Hello, dear friends. It's a joy to be with you again. And today, as we continue our walk together with Jesus to the cross in the midst of this Lenten season, I want us to reflect a bit upon the disciple named Judas, who would truly change the course of what it means to be faithful. So I want to read to you the Holy Gospel according to St. John in the 13th chapter, beginning with the first verse. Now before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, he got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. And then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." And Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who is bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table, he said to them, Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example that you also should do as I have done to you. Very truly I tell to you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. I'm not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but it is to fulfill the scripture. The one who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I tell you this now before it occurs, so that when it does occur, you may believe that I am he. Very truly I tell you, whoever receives one whom I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me." And after saying this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and declared, "Very truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." And this is the gospel of our Lord. Thanks be to God. So in the upper room, taking a towel, Jesus wrapped it around his waist, and Judas, who was gazing across the table, quickly watched in fascination as Jesus stripped off his outer robe, and Judas was wondering what Jesus was up to. What lesson was Jesus about to teach them in that upper room? Because with Jesus, there was always a lesson. There was always another thing to learn, another parable to analyze, another mysterious but familiar picture to make some sense of. Yes, everything with Jesus was so deliberate, as if everything hinged on the very next word that would come out of his mouth. It had become so confusing for Judas, so dangerous. For example, as Jesus took the water basin and the towel, Judas was reminded of the Samaritan woman at the well. Jesus shouldn't have spoken to her. It was just wrong. It was unclean. And Jesus had kept drawing all of the disciples into this sinful action. So something had to be done. Someone had to bring some common sense to these situations. Surely not everything that the Pharisees had done and said was wrong. They were the leaders, after all, people who were called and chosen by God. Yes, Judas knew that the temple authorities wanted to bring Jesus in for questioning. And now it was weighing very heavily upon his heart. Was this the right time for Jesus to rise as the Messiah? So Judas believed Jesus to be the Messiah, otherwise he wouldn't have kept following him. But maybe if the authorities would just listen to Jesus, they would see his wisdom and support his claim to be the Messiah. Wow! Then the Romans would really know the power of God. Wasn't this what the scripture promised, that the Messiah would restore Israel? But who would be trusted by the authorities to tell them where Jesus is? So the situation could be brought to a head. How could Jesus be forced to play his cards more openly and truly be the Messiah that we all want him to be? Judas pondered these questions as Jesus began to wash John's feet. John was his favorite, the most beloved. Yes, Peter was their leader, but John had a special bond with Jesus, and this was the kind of bond that Judas sought for himself. But lately, Judas had grown to feel like he was not part of the inner circle of trust, so to speak. Judas was thinking, after all, Jesus' attitude at Lazarus' home, when Mary wasted that very costly perfume on Jesus' feet, was simply irresponsible. And then Jesus rebuked my criticism of the waste in front of everybody. But Judas wasn't the only one that was rebuked. There were others who were certainly not perfect, like John and James, who were jockeying for power always, and as if they weren't favorites already. And then there was Peter. Enough said. Jesus even called him Satan. But just as that thought struck Judas, Peter began arguing with Jesus again. Peter didn't want Jesus washing his feet. And what did he mean? What did Jesus mean when he said, not all of you are clean? But then Jesus moved to Judas's feet. And then Jesus went on and on about serving others. But when Jesus finished washing the feet of Judas, he felt a sense of relief. The act was over, and he felt like a weight had been lifted. Finally, things were coming to a head. But Jesus just kept speaking. He was always speaking, always teaching. And Jesus said, the one who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. And what did that mean? Because they'd all had broken bread with Jesus. To Judas, Jesus seemed to be more agitated that night. But then Jesus had gone quiet. And all of the disciples began to cast glances at each other, including Judas. They had become a very intimate, very close group of men on the road together. Jesus could always sense their emotions, their fear, their curiosity, their doubt, but there was something else that he saw, and it was their love. And so as Judas looked across the room and he locked eyes with Jesus just for a moment, it was as if he was standing naked before Jesus. And Jesus could see his very soul. Jesus knew he couldn't hide his doubts from Christ. He knew Jesus saw his confusion, his disappointment. And then Jesus said, very truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me. And everyone began to look at each other. And suspicion and fear began to blossom in that room. But Judas continued to fix his stare at the bread in front of Jesus, rather than the other's eyes. Judas heard whispers in that room. Lord, who is it? Lord, who is it? And secretly, this is what Jesus wanted, wasn't it? Someone would hand Jesus over so things would come to a head so that God's will could be accomplished. And then Judas watched as Jesus' hand took the bread from the plate and dipped it into the dish, and then he offered it to Judas, and Jesus said to him with a whisper, do quickly what you're going to do. There was pain in Jesus' words, but trust as well. It was he, it was Judas who had to go. So now Judas would change the course of what it meant to be faithful. He would be obedient to the words of Christ. And yes, indeed, darkness descended upon him. Great darkness, which he wore like a cloak as he raced to the temple. And Judas continued to hear the words of Jesus in that room. Lord, who is it? The words of the disciples, Lord,